Countries around the world covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello, it's 8 o'clock. I'm Alastair Stewart. On the show tonight, how a private member's bill from a former cabinet minister might just help restore some trust in our battered parliament. Liam Fox joins me live. As UK Omicron infections hit 100,000 in a day, Wales and Northern Ireland join Scotland in going hard. Is England right or wrong to be cautious? And the film censor gets tough on what children can watch. Is it little more than a snowflake gesture and a boost to nasty stuff online? All of that coming up, but first a news update with Polly Middlehurst.
Alistair, thank you. Good evening. Two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron strain of COVID are less likely to need hospital treatment. Imperial College, which led one of those studies, found people with the variant are up to 45% less likely to stay in hospital than those that had the Delta variant. But researchers in a separate study in Scotland warned the mild nature of Omicron may be completely offset by its high transmissibility. That comes as the number of daily COVID-19 cases reached a record 6 figures. Government data has recorded 106,122 cases in the UK in a 24-hour period. Well, Wales and Northern Ireland are bringing in a series of new COVID restrictions from Boxing Day. The 2-metre social distancing rule will return to workplaces and public venues in Wales. Plus, they're bringing back the rule of 6, with a limit on the number of people allowed to attend events. While in Northern Ireland, nightclubs will be closed and people will be urged, but not mandated, to stick to 3 households mixing indoors. And a new version of the Pfizer COVID jab has been approved for use in children in the UK. The Medicines and Healthcare Agency gave the green light for the jab to 5 to 11-year-olds, who are at risk or in contact with those who are vulnerable. The Welsh Health Minister also said it will implement a rollout of COVID vaccines for at-risk children in the new year. In other news today, police investigating the disappearance of a man in London have begun searching the River Thames. 20-year-old Harvey Parker was last seen leaving a nightclub in the early hours of Friday morning. Following a search of local CCTV in central London, police said they're now concerned he may have entered the water. A deputy head teacher has been jailed for 13 years and 4 months at Liverpool Crown Court for child sex abuse offences, including 2 counts of rape. Julie Morris admitted filming herself and her partner raping a girl under the age of 13. The 44-year-old had been the safeguarding lead at her school in Wigan in Greater Manchester. The offences don't relate to her employment, but it's understood she sent photographs of pupils from her school to her partner, David Morris. An exquisitely preserved dinosaur embryo has been found inside a fossilised dinosaur egg. Discovered within rocks in southern China, the egg is believed to be up to 72 million years old and belongs to a toothless dinosaur. Scientists are excited, of course, about the discovery, which is around 27 centimetres long and is one of the best preserved specimens ever found. That's all from me. Now back to Al Stewart.
Winston Churchill observed that it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Our form of government, our democracy, has certainly been in the spotlight in recent times, and it hasn't looked great. Nor have many of the men and women who we choose through that democracy to represent us and govern us. It's been another year of backstabbing, disloyalty, charges of lobbying for cash, slanging matches and pathetic point scoring across the dispatch boxes. Ministers have been telling us not to do certain things, only to do them themselves, in the glare of publicity, off-the-record rehearsals and even hidden cameras. MPs and officials have been telling us to curb our behaviour, only to breach their own strictures with abandon, be it mask-wearing, garden parties or social distancing generally. But at least, hey, there was no more driving to get an eye test. Few, to be frank, have emerged with great distinction. But some have, and there have always been such good uns. Sadly, we lost two of them this year, MPs who stood out as good people. MPs James Brokenshire and Sir David Amess. At times of crisis, I think we need good men and women at the heart of our democracy, passing laws by which we are content to abide and offering leadership we are happy to follow. I fear most objective reports, however, would conclude that many ministers, MPs and government officials, quotes, must do better. But you know, on closer analysis, there are glimmers of hope. On the national stage, many MPs craft private members' bills on issues that they care passionately about and for which government either hasn't the time nor the inclination to do much about. Over the years, the issues have been rich and varied, from the late Sir David Amess himself and his Protection of Animals from Cruel Tethering Bill. He was, of course, a lifelong supporter of animal rights. Then there was Dr. Sarah Wollaston's stalking protection legislation in the news today. Labour's Carolyn Harris, who lost her son when he was just 8 years old, got the government to scrap child burial costs. And my friend Sharon Hodgson pushed measures on the special educational needs of some children. And Simon Kirby got action on protecting disabled persons' parking badges. They're often stolen and they're often abused. The list is rich and impressive. My point is that when they are at their best, MPs are impressive. That doesn't forgive those with their hands in the till or taking cash to represent outside interests, but it does put things in a little more perspective. Many MPs are also accused of only being in it to shin up the greasy pole of power, to say and do the right thing, whatever they actually believe, to get a ministerial red box, a smart office and, of course, a government chauffeur. But there have also been people like the Sports Minister, Tracy Crouch, who resigned from the government because it wasn't being hard enough on the gaming industry and their evil fixed odds betting machines. And I'm sure that there are thousands of you who can tell your own tales of your MP backing you over a blocked drain, a dodgy landlord, or an education problem your child's facing. So, as we inch toward the end of a turbulent year, rich in examples of MPs at their worst, let's hope that those who do the right thing for the right reason can still find a place in our affections. And through them, perhaps we can rediscover a little faith in our democracy. We will need it as we inch out of the coronavirus, and we'll have more on that in a moment, and as we begin to confront the huge challenges of getting our economy back on track and dealing with the mountain of problems and the mountain of national debt that we've built up over these last 2 years. And if we don't, well, remember that cautionary observation from Churchill that I made at the very top. Democracy isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than some of the other forms of government that have been tried from time to time. So let me return to that example of MPs doing the right thing via private members' bills. This from last week's final PMQs of the year. A question about a bill that would benefit people with Down syndrome.
Can I ask the Prime Minister if he will give his personal commitment to ensure that we get that bill on the statute book before International Down Syndrome Day, when we will be the first country in the world to do so? We talk about global Britain. It can't just be about trade and diplomacy. It must also be about values. Wouldn't that be a great place for Britain to start?
And I'm delighted to be joined live now by Dr. Liam Fox. Liam, very good evening to you. Why Down syndrome?
Well, first of all, there's an overwhelming case because people who have got Down syndrome currently will be the first generation to outlive their parents. When I was born, the life expectancy for someone with Down syndrome was about 13 years. When I became a junior doctor, it was about 30 years. and now it's almost 60. And that means that if we don't do something today, there will be a lot of parents who will be worrying about what happens when they're not there, and potentially a huge amount of disruption. And I think that, in politics, we do have the opportunity to avoid what would otherwise be perfectly clearly risk of personal tragedy. We can act, and we should act. And I've got my own personal experience. When I was growing up, the boy next door had Down syndrome. Obviously, as a doctor myself, I saw families deal with the problems, quite often complex medical problems. And as a politician, I've seen the range of issues. And what's been really nice about this process is that we've had support from every single party in the House of Commons, because MPs of all parties know in what you describe as, the least bad form of government in our type of democracy. They deal with real people as constituents, and they understand the issues. And, it's one of the great strengths,
Sure,
I think, of our parliamentary system.
The other thing that struck me, and you and I have talked about this in the past, is not only did they say, oh, yes, I'll support you, Liam, as you know very well, they sometimes say, but then when it comes to the crunch, they don't. Labour, Liberal Democrat, SNP, Green, across the spectrum, stood side by side with you on camera, on Twitter, to say, yes, it's the right thing to do.
Yes, and that was another really touching element, was that we set up one of these photocalls, which are not unusual for these private members' bills or single issue bills that go forward. And normally we'll get maybe a dozen or a couple of dozen MPs to come. We had 107 MPs came along to show their support. We had huge support outside the House of Commons on the day. And it does show that when people can see the point of legislation, when they can actually recognise the good that can be done by changing a law, there's a great deal of enthusiasm for it. And of course, the government gave their backing, which virtually ensures that it will become law, barring a couple of minor issues we still have to sort out.
I wish you well with it, and we'll watch it and keep in touch with it. And as you know, I've had the groups of supporters on the other programme I do at the weekends, and we've talked about it before. I can't have you on and not talk about COVID, which of course is the other thing that people are talking about, but very much in the context of Parliament. You cannot tell folk as lawmakers not to do something, only to then go and do it yourself. Do you fear that authority has been squandered here?
Well, I think it's easier for those who want to ignore the laws to give themselves an excuse to do so. So to that extent, the answer is yes. But I think for the vast majority of people, they understand that these rules are put in place for a reason, for reasons of public health. And I think they also now see that Parliament is not simply going to give an okay to any rules that are suggested, but will scrutinise them, I think, more rigorously than perhaps at the beginning of the pandemic. So I hope that the public recognise that the rules that are put in place are there for a reason. And after all, the law is the law. I think part of the problems come when there have been legal rules that are enforceable by the law and guidance on top of that. And where they've not been the same, I think that's led to some confusion in the public, quite understandably, I think.
But interestingly, a fascinating distinction, because if it's guidance, then the role of leadership and example is even more important. And that at the highest reaches of government, I would argue, has been squandered.
Well, I think that that leadership is always required. And part of the requirements of leadership are to show the rest of the country what should be done. So, I hope that lessons have been learned here. I'm not going to comment on the specifics because they're under investigation. But I think we also need to look at the question of leadership in terms of how well Britain got off on the vaccination programme, how well we've done with the booster programme, and looking at the figures that were put out today. Considering all that we've been through, this time last year, we were getting about 40,000 people per day with COVID in hospital. Today, we're running at about 8,000, something like that. And that number's been relatively flat. And it looks as though, notwithstanding the Omicron level of infection and level of transmissibility, that we have flattened out that curve. And that's a great tribute to everybody involved, to those in the government who had the foresight to order the vaccines, to the army of people who've been giving the vaccines, and to the vast majority of the sensible British public who've recognised that getting the vaccine is not only the best way to protect yourself, but to protect others. And it can't always just be about my rights, what I want. It has also to be about what's good for other people in our society.
Yeah, absolutely right. You're in that small and refined group of people who are not only a member of Parliament, but also a scientist, a doctor specifically. Do you think, with your politician's hat on, that we gave too much credence to some of the scientists, not least the modelers, and that politicians should perhaps have had more self-confidence in saying, no, we're not going to go down that road, we're going to go down this road?
That's several good questions in one, Alistair, so you've not lost your touch. I think that it's difficult for politicians who don't have a background in science to be able to tackle scientists on their territory. And I think there are questions there in both the civil service and in politics about whether we have people drawn from a wide enough spectrum of experience to be able to ask those taxing questions with intellectual self-confidence. But I think that I think that there has been, my judgment, I think, would be that we've had far too much faith in modelling. But we have an old saying in medicine that the most useful medical instrument is a retrospectoscope, because you always get the diagnosis right with it. And I think it's very easy to say that, we should have done this and we should have done that. But the question for me will be, have we learned the lessons for the future? And I hope that any major inquiry into the COVID outbreak looks at issues around capacity of the NHS, whether we've got sufficient expertise in government and civil service and in Parliament to be able to ask these questions and understand some of the complex scientific issues around them. I've no objection to having done politics, philosophy and economics at university, but I'm not terribly sure that knowing what philosophers think is absolutely the key piece of knowledge in a pandemic.
Liam Fox takes a shot at PPE and down it crashes to the ground. I'm going to be slightly cheeky again and kind of you to say I haven't lost my touch, but talking about that, there are several people, as I said a moment ago, in the House who are scientists and former doctors. You've taken a shot at leadership yourself on a couple of occasions. Do you think it might be time to clear the decks and let somebody like you, or perhaps your colleague Jeremy Hunt, someone who really knows what they're talking about on these questions, to have a go? Should Boris go and the party take a fresh start?
Well, for my own part, you can have a few shots at leadership, but not as many shots as leadership has at you. It will be up to colleagues to decide. My personal view is that this is not the right time. We're still in the middle of a public health emergency. We're potentially on the edge of a major security emergency in Europe, and I'm not sure that people have really registered quite how severe the situation is with Putin in the Ukraine. I do think that we need to have some stability at the present time, and the only communication I'll be having on paper with the chairman of the 1922 committee is a Christmas card.
For those who don't know that very clever, subtle point, it is letters that are sent to the chairman of the 1922 committee when you say it's time for a leadership challenge. So a nice exchange there. Final one on this, and oddly enough, my last two questions are about the international stage, about which you've written in the past. But my final one is this, quite seriously, as a senior backbencher. I said at the beginning, hopefully coronavirus is on the way down, getting under control, or we're learning to live with it. The big challenges going forward, not least the international affairs that we'll talk about in just a moment, are economic. Do you feel, Liam, that enough thought is being put into that right now about inflation, about growth, about public debt? That's what defines your party, normally.
Well, the Conservative Party is the party of sound money and has to be. I think that people across the country haven't really understood the threat of inflation. I think it's partly because in the last generation we've lived with very low inflation and very low interest rates. Not something that, when I was a young doctor, for example, and I bought a flat, and I remember it was 10.38% interest rate on that, and I could just manage, and 18 months later it was 14.88%. which virtually took up all the money I was earning. People today have not had that experience, and I hope that policymakers act quickly. I think the Bank of England has acted too slowly. I think that other central banks are acting even more slowly. And I think with inflation, if you don't stay ahead of the curve, then the measures you ultimately have to take are even more painful than had you acted early. So I think that we need to stay on top of it. Inflation always hits the poorest the hardest. And so there is a social and moral agenda as well as an economic one here.
Yeah, absolutely right. So we've got a couple of minutes left, Liam, and I did want to talk to you about foreign affairs. You raised it in passing in one of the other answers. But the thing that strikes me as being deeply and gravely troubling is that COVID quite rightly has dominated public affairs for 2 years because it's matters of life and death for all of us. But there are key questions that are slipping. China, cyber interference, the elections recently in Hong Kong. You mentioned Russia, Ukraine. How troubled are you that these global tensions are going on around us while we wrestle with a domestic health issue?
Hugely. I'm going to cough. Thanks.
We can't edit it out because it's live, Liam. Are you all right? Do you need a glass of water?
Not something you can give me from there.
No, indeed not. Are you done?
Thanks.
OK, I think, Liam, we'll leave you there. You're a doctor, you know when you can't go on any further. But for the time being, yeah, sorry about that.
Thanks,
Liam, thank you very much indeed, and I will see you soon. He said I hadn't lost my touch. It's the first time for quite a while that a senior politician has got a coughing fit, which quite rightly he says he's going to take that away with him and deal with it elsewhere. But intriguing thoughts there from Liam Fox on how Parliament can come together when the time is right. But if it wishes to continue having authority over what we do, then it needs to learn once again to behave itself. And politicians can interrogate the scientists and the modellers and the statisticians, but best if MPs who are scientists as well are doing it. And perhaps there's a greater role there for the Select Committee on Health and Social Care and the rest of it. But I hope you found that interesting, mainly about Down syndrome and Private Members Bill, but also a good vehicle for trying to restore a little bit of faith in some of our politicians. After the break, there's good news and bad news in the fight against COVID. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A lot of cloud around for this coming night. As a result of this, a little bit less cold than it's been recently, particularly in the south. There is some rain around and the air's still cold enough though for some ice across Scotland as this rain mingles with colder air here. Some snow too for the mountains of northern Scotland. Elsewhere though, any early evening rain should soon clear away to leave a lot of cloud around. 1 or 2 clear spells for central and eastern England, but a good deal of cloudy grey weather to start Thursday morning. And after an early dip in temperatures across the east, well, those temperatures generally coming up from the west, so not as cold, particularly in the south, compared to last night. So it will be a fairly grey start to Thursday morning. Still some rain across parts of Scotland. This will tend to fizzle out for a time before being boosted by the next weather front coming in from the southwest. So quite a wet day to come for Scotland. Some rain too for Northern Ireland and for Northern England, but rain elsewhere across England and Wales, not really amounting to too much. And as the rain clears, we see some milder air coming into the southwest. So temperatures here, 11, 12, 13 degrees on Thursday afternoon. Still on the chilly side, though, in and to the north of this rain band. And the air certainly cold enough for across Scotland on Thursday night into Christmas Eve morning for some quite significant snowfall across the mountains, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling here. Elsewhere, though, into Christmas Eve morning, the rain will clear through. We're left with clear spells, but a lot of damp ground, so potentially some fog patches forming, but it won't be as cold for most of us as it has been for some recent nights. So Christmas Eve could start quite grey, quite foggy across central southern England. The fog here will take its time to clear on Christmas Eve morning. So again, bear that in mind if you have Christmas travel plans. But the fog will lift from the west as this next band of rain comes in from the west. Some quite heavy rain for parts of southwest England, Wales into Northern Ireland. A drier day for Scotland. Scotland still in the colder air ahead of this weather front. And this sets the scene then as we move into Christmas Day. We've got cold air to the north and east of the UK, milder air trying to push into the south. Where these weather fronts separate the dividing line, well, that's where we've got the greatest chance of seeing snow. So quite an unsettled picture, so certainly some rain around at times, with some quite low temperatures in the north. Here we've got the chance of some snow too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
In the last few hours, there's been some good news and some bad news in the fight against COVID. Let's start with the bad news. The UK has reported more than 100,000 daily cases for the first time since the start of the pandemic. However, the first study into patients suffering from Omicron in England suggests that they are 15% less likely to attend hospital and fully 40% less likely to be hospitalised for a night or more, compared to those people who've suffered from the Delta variant. Well, I'm joined now by Professor Angus Dalgleish. He's Professor of Oncology, Cancer, at St George's Hospital Medical School in London. Good to see you, as always. First of all, as it were, breaking news. It's been trickling through late afternoon, early evening. How encouraged are you by this report on the likely hospitalisations?
Well, I think the likely hospitalisation data is consistent with what we were told and warned by South Africa. This is not as bad as Delta. Although it's more infectious, it's less likely to lead to hospital admissions, etc. And this seems to be bearing this out. So I think that is indeed good news.
Can you clarify something for me? And I had a long chat with my producer about this, whether these, do you understand it, that these are estimates, which are a little bit like modelling, or hard fact? And how confident can we be as a genuine measure of what's going on right now?
Well, they should be based on hard facts as opposed to modelling, like infectious rates. These should be hard facts based on who came into hospital, who's been seen at hospital, and those numbers are accumulated and then compared. So I think these are real data, which is in the right direction.
Sure, that's an important point of clarification. So we're moving up the positive, optimistic scale. However, we do know now, fact as well, that more than 100,000 infections were reported today. Now, here's the question. With Wales and Northern Ireland now following Scotland with new tougher restrictions, albeit from Boxing Day, do you fear that the Westminster government is burying its head in the sand?
No, I don't. We know that this virus is much more infectious. And we know that, as I've pointed out several scenarios, is that we know that if you have fully vaccinated people with negative lateral flow tests and they meet and they take all precautions, the majority can still go down with the Omi variant in the next 48 hours or so. But the good news is they just got mild symptoms like the cold or the flu. And I would just reiterate, I was one of the first people to sign up to the Great Barrington Declaration, which we now know was completely trumped by Anthony Fauci. And this was taken up by our own government and Matt Hancock in particular in completely trashing myself and colleagues for actually taking a slightly different view, which I believe is going to turn out to be correct. You cannot stop a highly infectious virus going through the population by lockdown unless you're prepared to go on do it for year after year, by which time people will be removing themselves from the population out of sheer tedium, etc. And so I really do believe that we should allow this to go through. The people who are very susceptible, that's what we said right at the beginning, you look after them, you protect them. But everybody else, the quicker we have a herd immunity to this, the quicker we can get on with our lives. And I still, in spite of all the criticism and abuse that we've had for this, which I think actually is really not warranted. It warranted a proper debate, which was basically trashed, as I said, by Fauci. I'm furious now. I know that the big source is Fauci, and he basically seems to have a commander-like power over everybody else, including Whitty and Valence, etc., who do whatever he say. And I am really furious with him because I totally disagree with his take on that. And that's what we're seeing. And we know that viruses, when they have epidemics like this and become endemic, they do become more infectious and they get less dangerous. That is the way it's going to die out. So trying to do a lockdown thing is just going to delay the process, prolong the misery. So that is why I am so anti taking all these restrictions.
And Angus, let me drag you back from the United States and Fauci quite specifically to the United Kingdom. My first guest tonight was Dr. Liam Fox, and as you know, Member of Parliament, former Cabinet Minister, but the doctor bit is a medical doctor. It's not a PhD or something. He was there as a GP. He said one of the real fault lines in this whole dilemma has been that we don't have politicians who are qualified scientifically to interrogate advisors and guides. They have to take a deep breath and go with the science. Do you see that as having been a real fault line?
Yes, I do. I think he's absolutely spot on there. We used to have cabinets of people with very broad backgrounds, and now there's nobody in the cabinet with any medical or scientific experience whatsoever. So they can be basically bullied by their advisors because they're not able to stand up to them. And I think the admission at the weekend that a major SAGE advisor basically said, we do the modelling and we give the worst outcome scenario to the politicians, treating them like children, so they will actually do something about it. So basically, the scientists have basically said, we're the politicians, we just get the politicians to do what we want. I think that is absolutely appalling. Even I couldn't believe that that was going on. I think it was Fraser Nelson who tweeted this fellow and managed to get that confession out of him. I think it is truly appalling. And I must say, just a little anecdote, it reminds me very much of Margaret Thatcher when it said, "You're going to go down as the first woman Prime Minister in the UK." She said, "Yes, that's true, but it's a tragedy that I'm not going to go down as the first minister with a science degree in the Prime Minister with a science degree." And I think that was one of the most profound statements going, because that's what we don't have. We don't have people who are qualified to interpret, and I'm sorry to say, often what is a lot of bullshit from these people, and to be able to act on it properly. And I'm very annoyed we've not been able to hold.
I have to interrupt just to say, I'm sure it was an off-the-cuff remark, but we must be cautious about our language, if you'd be so kind. I know you feel heated about it, but an apology on our joint behalves on that. Let me finish. We've got a couple of. I'm not cutting you off because of that, but because we've only got a couple of minutes left. But I want to shift from that, but very much with COVID and the coronavirus as a backdrop to my story. How close is your own area of expertise, oncology, cancer? How close is it to being critical now in terms of treating folk as well as referring them for treatment?
Well, it has been critical for a long time. It's been critical ever since we had the COVID epidemic come upon us and take over the majority of the wards in a lot of hospitals. It basically impacted upon our routine screening, diagnosis and early treatment of cancer. And this is a devastating effect. It's been put up to figures of around 250,000 of people who've not been timely investigated and treated, have been confirmed, and that the knock-on effect of these people who are going to die early because they've not received the right treatment is enormous, and something which we must not allow to continue. And that it has been a problem that COVID has been getting the first priority on everything, and everything else has been pushed down. We have tried very, very hard all sorts of ingenious scenarios to make sure we try and prevent this delay being knocked down the road. But it has already happened, and it is a real tragedy. And I know many cases of people who presented with very late stage cancer who could have been cured if they'd been picked up earlier, if it hadn't been for the impact of COVID.
Angus Dalgleish, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Professor Angus Dalgleish there. And it's live television. It's a heated argument, but I do apologise on our behalf at GB News, but also on Angus's behalf for that language that was out of place. My apologies for that. I hope it didn't offend. Now, a study out today says that the majority of teachers want pupils to take their GCSEs when they are ready, rather than having to wait until they are 15 or 16. Research by Oxford University Press also found significant support for a reduction in the number of exams in Year 11. I'm delighted to be joined now by Christine Cunniff, who is the principal of LVS School in Ascot and a good friend of GB News. Always very, very good to see you. LVS obviously is a private sector, which takes me neatly to my first question. The private sector's been pushing the brightest through GCSEs early for years, hasn't it? I mean, my eldest son went to Winchester College. You did maths and Latin as quickly as you could. Quite often it was in Year 2.
Wow, Year 2. Yeah, I mean, in the independent school, we do have the freedom to be able to take children through to their potential as early as possible without pushing them, without it being an academic hothouse. And in fact, in January, our whole of our Year 11 will sit their GCSE maths, because we believe they're ready for it. And those that take it and get the grade that they want will be able to free up some time to study other subjects. So I'm all for it, Some
people have been saying, when I mentioned on Twitter that we were having this conversation, some people have been saying, oh, yes, but you see, it's another example of the poor, slow ones being left behind while you concentrate on the bright ones and push them through. In fact, it strikes me as being quite the opposite, that the bright ones are so good that they can get on with it themselves, leaving teachers more quality time to help those, like me in maths, who need help.
Yeah. Oh, you need help in maths. Oh, well, I didn't know that. So with the upper sets in our school, for example, they tend to have more children in the classes because they do get on with it, as you say, leaving the smaller sets for the teachers to spend more time with and bring those children to where they should be as well. So, there is an opportunity there. It's always been there, and I think it's something that we could all accommodate.
How do you structurally identify on arrival those youngsters who are going to be academic superstars and they need particular help and attention, and those who are more practical, more technically minded, whatever it might be? You make an assessment, I guess, on entry or at 13, and they have the same curriculum, but presumably different teaching methods.
Yeah, we're an all ability school as well, so we don't have any entrance tests. So as long as the children are happy and can access the curriculum, then they can have a place here. So we baseline test them when they come into school. I mean, most schools will baseline test with their children when they come in, look at previous school reports, look at how they've been progressing if they're through school like we are as well. And we look ahead to see what the curriculum might look like for those children and what support those children might need. So it could be we might look at more vocational subjects in the sixth form for a particular year or two if we need them, or more academic. You can see the potential coming through. It's all about identifying that need and monitoring it carefully through the years.
Absolutely. You touch on what was going to be my last question, but I've just moved it up the list because of what you said. Again, it's live television. This is Oxford University Press, but it's also working with the Times Education Commission, Rachel Sylvester and her friends, a really brilliant forum for open debate. And it also discovered that only half of teachers thought that the curriculum for pupils aged between 14 and 16 was broad enough and balanced enough. Somebody said to me recently, we have a 21st century set of children being taught by 20th century teachers a 19th century curriculum. I mean, that's a bigger problem than GCSEs, isn't it?
It's absolutely huge, and it's about time we woke up and did something about it. So, for example, this summer, if the exams go ahead, we'll be asking the majority of our children to sit in an exam hall for 2 to 3 hours with a pen and paper. Now, that doesn't sit well when we're talking about blended learning, the use of devices, the world of technology. Why are things not moving forward? That's my big question.
Yeah. A final question then, and I've now gone back in the order. The other thing that struck me reading this report is that it begs yet again the merit and quality of GCSE itself as an exam. I'm jokingly about needing help on maths. That was when it was called an O-level. Then along came CSE as well. There's a raging debate about A-levels. Is it time to have a rethink on all public examinations, or just improve and tinker with the structure we've got at the moment? What's your view on that?
I think, with COVID, that in chaos always comes an opportunity. This is a perfect storm, and we could make change now if we put our minds to it. Because I do think the GCSE and A-level curriculums are very restrictive. And what you find in schools, that teachers are actually teaching to the syllabus, they're teaching to the grade criteria to get those grades for the league tables, which again, I do not agree with at all. I think it's about potential. I think it's about extracurricular. I think it's about children being happy. And I think it's about time we took a look at the whole thing. And that includes entrance to university too. And if you need any help with your maths, then please contact LVS Ascot, because we can help you.
As you well know, I have someone in my family who's very good at helping on those matters as well. Christine Cunniff, genuinely always a pleasure. So thoughtful, so balanced, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Look forward to talking to you again very, very soon.
Merry Christmas.
Christine.
Merry Christmas.
And to you, my dear. Christine Cunniff, who's the head of the brilliant LVS school at Ascot. After the break, find out what Priti Patel has had to say about the police who are investigating those controversial non-crime hate incidents.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. There has been a major development in a story that we brought you on Monday about the former police officer Harry Miller, whose comments on social media were recorded as a non-crime hate incident. Well, now the Home Secretary herself, Priti Patel, has got involved, and the laws on non-hate crime incidents are set to be changed. I'm joined now by Tom Slater, the editor of Spiked, who's written lots of articles about this very subject. Tom, always good to see you. So Priti Patel is not just cross over non-crime hate incidents, but is talking about an amendment to the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill next month. This looks like real anger from the Home Secretary.
Oh, certainly. I think you see it in the write-up of her particular response to this. So Priti Patel has had a very diplomatic response originally, suggesting that the police, while she supports them in policing hate crime, this cannot breach into interfering with freedom of speech, as the Court of Appeal in the Harry Miller case found that it had in his case and in all other instances. But I think what was interesting was buried in some of the reports, the responses from sources saying that we want offers to police actual crime, not hurt feelings. I think the police have done an awful lot of damage to themselves by going down this kind of rabbit hole of policing non-crime hate incidents, as you said, such a strange, almost Orwellian concept. And as a result, I think it's done a lot of damage to their reputation. So something has to change. Obviously, they've been found to be illegal, this collecting of this particular data, but it seems like the Home Secretary is going to make it official by binding this into law to ensure that the police aren't collecting these in the way that they have done previously. Yeah. So a very strong intervention from her, definitely.
The other thing that struck me as being really important about this particular case is that it seems to me as if the College of Policing, the kind of think tank university of policing in this country, has simply overstepped the mark. It is their guidelines that were being carried out as if they had the force of law.
I mean, this is one of the things that's so striking about these non-crime hate incidents. It wasn't as if at some point in time that Parliament had made a law saying that the police, we want you to collect this type of information, which is, as many viewers will know at this point, is essentially any sort of incident which is perceived by the victim or by anyone else, could be a passerby, could be a police officer, as being a hate incident, as being hatefully motivated. These things are recorded, they go on people's records, you can't expunge them. And this, as I was saying, had nothing to do with a change in law. It was something that in 2014, the College of Policing, as you say, produced these guidelines. And as a result of this, between 2014 and 2019, 120,000 of these were recorded. A few thousand of them were for people who were under the age of 17. And it's just a really alarming situation in which infringements on our liberties, which are created by our sovereign parliament, are one thing. At least you can challenge that, you can write to your MP, you can try and push back against it. If you've effectively got a quango interfering in your freedom of speech to this degree and setting policy for the police, that's a very serious problem. So it's been so great to see this actually be challenged in courts and now by the government.
Absolutely right. It's also the real danger of precedent and snowballing, because This guidance, as it were, can be traced all the way back to the Macpherson inquiry on the murder of Stephen Lawrence, about which I know a bit because I interviewed Macpherson himself, and I interviewed Paul Condon at the time, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, where they came up. Macpherson recommended certain perfectly sensible strictures on race relations and race hate and race crime. The College of Policing has added on themselves religion, sexuality, and, as you rightly say, issues of transgender. I'm sorry, that is overstepping the mark.
It is overstepping the mark. And as you say, this was the defence that the College of Policing had for many years. We are just implementing the requirements of the recommendations, rather, of the Macpherson report, which quite sensibly said that you want to have police which are recording intelligence on the state of race relations in a particular area, etc. But they didn't breach into those recommendations didn't breach into all these other areas. And at no point did it suggest that the police would effectively go around recording instances of anyone who had broached or breached some kind of one of our kind of modern shibboleths around gender or anything else. I mean, it really was kind of open season in relation to these things. Anyone could exploit the system. My favourite example, if I might just throw one into the mix, was back in 2016. Then Home Secretary Amber Rudd had a non-crime hate incident recorded against her because of a speech that she gave on immigration, and the person who shopped her for it had later admitted to not actually having heard or read it. So this is the sort of thing that had been set up, massively overstepping the mark on the part of the College of Policing, and so important it's been pushed back upon, definitely.
Yeah. The final question, and I don't want to sound pompous or profound beyond my station, but as I may have indicated in my line of questioning, I do think this is deeply significant. Toby Young was involved in the court case with Officer Miller. You've written extensively about it. Priti Patel is now engaged and talking about changing statute rather than case law, which the judge herself already has done. In your view, is this quite a turning point in the debate over free speech in this country?
I think it's incredibly significant. I think it speaks to a pushback that we've seen in recent years against the encroachment of the state onto the question of freedom of speech. I think in essence, this was probably one of the easier wins, because this wasn't a question of changing law, it was a question of changing the guidance. But I think what's really helpfully opened up is a discussion about the laws that we currently have, the fact that even when we're not talking about non-crime, as of according to an investigation in 2017, as many as 9 people a day being arrested in this country for saying offensive things online. It was a really significant win, I think, because it just opens up this broader conversation.
All right,
about not only far non-crime has gone, but even the law as well, which is important.
Tom, we've got to stop there, otherwise we'll fall off the end, and I don't want to do that on such an important subject. Good to talk to you always, and we'll talk again, I'm sure, about it. That's Tom Slater there from Spiked. And finally, some of the most successful and universally loved films have been given stricter ratings. The British Board of Film Classification has changed the age rating of classic films such as Jaws, OK, bit nasty, legs being chomped, Ghostbusters, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. This supposedly was done to keep in step with the direction in which society is moving, close quotes. But is this merely pushing a woke agenda? And since so many children view sex and violence prematurely online, is this age change completely pointless? To talk about this development, I'm delighted to be joined by entertainment reporter and movie expert Ellie Phillips. Why on earth are Jaws and Ghostbusters having their age ratings upgraded?
I think the conversation is about the impact of watching violence at certain ages. I think we know so much more now about how what we see on screen impacts us when we're at certain ages. And as we learn more information, obviously, then we can make changes that help protect our children better. So I think that's the basic premise about this. I'm not sure it's necessarily about sensitivity, because I think there's been a lot of talk over the last day or two since this news has come out that it's all about, people are more sensitive now, and we're all snowflakes. But I actually think it's more about the fact that
I'm only about to interrupt. I mean, you're an expert on
go for it.
Movies, TV, DVDs, all sorts of entertainment. What strikes me as being daft about it is that the whole certification thing nowadays in the 21st century is a nonsense, because porn, unfortunately, is easily available to children, and some pretty gruesome stuff on DVD. This is just a token gesture.
I mean, it might be a token gesture, but it also protects films, you know, when things come out in the press, especially when you think about in America, and I think we take that over here as well at the moment, is that, you know, if there is an incident of violence and a young person has been the perpetrator, and then they say, well, I've been watching these films, it protects the film, saying, well, actually, you shouldn't have been seeing them, and it's your parents' responsibility in that case to make sure that you didn't. So it adds that extra layer of protection for the filmmakers and those who are distributing the films. And you do talk about online, but there are measures in place for parents when it comes to, you know, what their kids are able to access with, you know, the parents are aware of. Or, you know, it's not always the case that they can protect them 100%, but I think having measures in place helps, because we do know how vulnerable children can be and how much we learn from what we see on screen. And I think the point about updating things that are maybe 50 years old is that times have changed, laws have changed. When it comes to sex, drugs and violence in particular, you know, when is it okay to expose a child to saying, well, this happens in the world, this is what's normal, or this is what isn't normal, when those things may have drastically changed in time as our learning changes.
Final question, Ellie, and it's brilliant in the middle of that answer. I hadn't thought of it at all, that it protects the movie maker from being accused of exposing the child to it. So this is more about Hollywood and its friends protecting itself than us protecting our little darlings.
I think it's twofold, because, I mean, just for example, so Hocus Pocus, if you remember the film about 3 witches who, you know, hunt after children, that was actually PG. I don't remember the age I watched it, but I was traumatized by that film. Everyone else thought it was hilarious, this funny film. I genuinely was traumatized for about 2 years afterwards. And so it's both. I was never going to go and sue the makers of Hocus Pocus, but at the same time, that PG was like, well, you know, did your parents know you were going to be okay watching this or not? And actually, I learned from that. My parents learned, okay, she's not okay with watching things that are a bit scary at this point, and I stopped and I stayed away. No more
Ellie, brilliant anecdote to end on. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Ellie Phillips there. That's it for this evening. I'm back at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Patrick Christie's up at 9. But first, your weather. A very good evening.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A lot of cloud around for this coming night. As a result of this, a little bit less cold than it's been recently, particularly in the south. There is some rain around, and the air's still cold enough, though, for some ice across Scotland as this rain mingles with colder air here. Some snow, too, for the mountains of northern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, any early evening rain should soon clear away to leave a lot of cloud around. 1 or 2 clear spells for central and eastern England, but a good deal of cloudy grey weather to start Thursday morning. And after an early dip in temperatures across the east, well, those temperatures generally coming up from the west, so not as cold, particularly in the south, compared to last night. So it will be a fairly grey start to Thursday morning. Still some rain across parts of Scotland. This will tend to fizzle out for a time before being boosted by the next weather front coming in from the southwest. So quite a wet day to come for Scotland. Some rain too for Northern Ireland and for Northern England, but rain elsewhere across England and Wales, not really amounting to too much. And as the rain clears, we see some milder air coming into the southwest. So temperatures here, 11, 12, 13 degrees on Thursday afternoon. Still on the chilly side, though, in and to the north of this rain band. And the air certainly cold enough for across Scotland on Thursday night into Christmas Eve morning for some quite significant snowfall across the mountains, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling here. Elsewhere, though, for into Christmas Eve morning, the rain will